I would like to introduce Kathy Krebs. Kathy is an occupational therapist who has 20 years of experience working with children and adults with developmental disabilities. She specialized in treating children with autism and their families within the last 10 years and has been working with children impacted by trauma in a preschool setting. The focus of her treatment has been to collaborate with the child and family or child and classroom team to develop interventions that are individualized, that are going to help meet the needs, sensory and motor needs of the child. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy.
So thank you all for letting me be here today. I am excited about this topic. So we're going to talk about just sensory processing and what that means for this population of kids. And I have a facilitator, sweet Elsie, who's going to help me flip through my screen. So ready for the next one, Elsie. I work at Cincinnati Children's. I have nothing to disclose. And so here, our learning objectives for today, I really want us to have a discussion, an open collaborative discussion about how sensory processing difficulties for these kids look different from what we've previously seen as sensory processing difficulties. There's new terminology. I'm going to walk you through the terminology of sensory under and over responsive, and then sensory craving. And I'd really like us to spend more time in the sensory craving area because that's the area that our kids tend to fall. And then I really want us to spend some time talking through what are some activities that we can start to think about doing with these kids. One of the areas that I worry about for our kids is we get a diagnosis of sensory processing disorder, which they do fall into that, but then we send families out to look for information, and the information that they get regarding sensory processing difficulties, they go home and they try to implement it, and it doesn't work for their kids, and then they get frustrated, and then we just develop this whole loop of I've tried everything and nothing's working, and you know, I really just want to try to break that loop up and try to figure out what exactly it is that these kids need from a sensory perspective. The other part of my brain is motor. I never separate out sensory from motor. They develop simultaneously when kids are growing, and they stay with us for our whole entire life. So I always compare or combine sensory and motor activities so that I can best meet the needs of the kids. The other big learning objective here is that more than ever, the treatment really needs to be individualized for these kids. What works for one kid might not work for another, and not to be super frustrating, but what works one day might not work the next day. It doesn't mean you shouldn't keep trying to figure out that sweet spot for that kid. Okay. And please, please, please raise your hand or speak up and interrupt while I'm talking. I really, really do want today to be a place for us to have this open discussion. We don't have an opportunity to do this very often. I do get to talk with my peers and my coworkers, but most of the time I'm talking individually with families. We don't really have a big group place except here, so I feel like this is the best place for us to have open discussion. Okay, so next slide, please. So my references are the Star Institute for Sensory Processing Disorder. They are out in Denver, Colorado, and they do great work. Most of the terminology that I'm going to be going over with you today is from them. There's also a really nice book from Lucy Jane Miller, who's an occupational therapist, that I think is a good reference for all of our kids. And then there is another occupational therapist who is starting to introduce us to this idea of interoception, which is a different sensory system that we haven't really studied or brought into our practice until the last few years. So this is newer information. Okay, next slide, please. So you can see here, the first 5 are all the sensory sensations that we're all familiar with. So I want to pay attention to the ones that we are less familiar with, and that's the bottom 3. So vestibular input, that's the input that you get from your inner ear of where your body is in space. Where you are in relation to gravity. Are you moving? Are you still? Are you, you know, what is your body doing? What's happening? Then there's proprioception. That's information from your joints and your muscles regarding where your body is in space. So I don't know if you've ever done this test before, but That is, if you close your eyes and someone were to position your left arm, you would be able to then position your right arm in the same place because of the information from your joints and your muscles. It tells you where your body is. Now, interoception, this is the newest one, and it is by far the hardest to understand and the hardest to really teach. But interoception is that sensation that we get from inside our body. So it's from our organs, and it's also from some other spaces in our body, but I'm not going to get too technical about it. But this gives us our feeling of hunger, our feeling of full. It tells you when you have to go to the bathroom. It tells you when you're feeling anxious. It tells you all of the things that we kind of just take for granted, but a lot of kids don't have that internal sensation. So when I'm nervous, I can tell that my heart rate's a little bit faster, I speed up my speech a little bit more, my fingers get cold. Those are all things that I can pay attention to help me learn what's happening with my body so that I can then try to figure out what I need to do to regulate it. So sometimes when you hear people talking about kids who just blow up out of nowhere, they didn't know they were about to blow. They didn't feel their heart beating. They didn't feel their belly getting kind of butterfly-ish before it happened. So this is an area that needs so much more attention, and we're just learning about it. So next slide, please. Please interrupt me if you have questions. So this is from the STAR Institute. This is the overview of sensory processing disorder, and it's broken down into 3 areas: sensory modulation disorder, sensory-based motor disorder, and sensory discrimination disorder. I believe that our kids fall into the sensory modulation disorder. That's that idea that they cannot regulate their ability to pay attention, their ability to move from one activity to another, versus some of the other areas. Within sensory processing disorder, we have sensory over-responsivity and under-responsivity, and we have sensory craving. So sensory over-responsivity, the first 2 we've heard a lot more about. So next slide, please. We're just going to break down into sensory, the subtypes. So the sensory modulation disorder difficulties in general, they have difficulty regulating responses to any type of input, and it can differ from day to day. So one day I might be able to listen to music that's loud and energetic, but another day, or even 10 minutes later, that input might be completely obnoxious. They're going to have difficulty with obtaining and maintaining the appropriate arousal level for activities. And they're also really going to have a hard time changing from a high energy activity to a low energy activity without some kind of modulation exercise in between. So you can't have recess time and then come inside and expect them to be able to read a book. And then this just leads to difficulty adapting to challenges in your daily life. Getting dressed in the morning, getting your teeth brushed. Everything just seems so, so difficult, and sometimes it looks like it was a surprise. Even if we have a routine established and we have schedules and all of those things, it still really seems like, parents will come to me and say, we've done this exact same thing the same way every single day. And, I woke him up this morning and it was a surprise that he needed to brush his teeth, which led then to a 30-minute meltdown. So, next slide, please. So sensory over-responsiveness is something that I've learned a long, long time ago, and I think this is a lot more out there in the internet and easily accessible to families and professionals. But this is what used to be called as the sensory defensiveness, where too much information, just a little bit of information causes us to react in a big way. And so these kids can be easily overwhelmed with input. They can become aggressive because it feels like it hurts when they're touched, or the sound hurts, or the sight, the lights hurt. They can become really irritable and fussy, and they can also just retreat. So these kids really are, our goal for these kids is to slowly introduce input so that they can become used to it, and we're raising their threshold for adaptability and ability to accept input. Are people familiar with that idea that, it's kind of it relates a little bit to the psychology term of sensory, like desensitization, like when we're thinking about, I don't like the feeling of, I'm going to pick something random like the squishy, those little balls that we put water in and then they blow up and then they're like, those are disgusting to me. And one of the classrooms I'm in, they have them all the time and they're like, we're just going to help you desensitize to those. But it's a gradual, slow exposure to the experience or the feeling so that they can build up a tolerance for it. So it is also referred to often as sensory desensitization is what we need to help them do. Okay, next slide, please. Sensory under responsivity. These are kids that don't want to move as much, not because they're afraid of the movement, but because they are just, they're slower to get going. They're a lower level of arousal. They tend to just kind of hang out and watch and do only when really, really encouraged to do so. So in this way, we've got to give them more intensity to raise their arousal level and get them engaged with us so that they can engage, or so they can maintain and their arousal level that matches the activity that we want them to do. Okay, and then next, this is the area that I feel like the population of kids that we're focusing this class on really fit. This used to be referred to as sensory seeking. So I really want us to try to think about changing some of that terminology, because sensory seeking gives us the idea, and I might have this again on another slide, but this gives us the idea that these kids are looking for something, and if we can give that to them, then it'll be better. But first, let me just go through what some of the craving behaviors look like. The kids really want to have a sense of control in every situation. So when we're playing, the kids want to have control of the items, they want to have control of the actions. They don't like to share their toys necessarily because it becomes a comfort thing that they have theirs. They cannot inhibit themselves from interrupting. So if they have something that they want to say or do, they have to get it out right then or there, or they'll forget it. They can be very angry and explosive, and I put angry in there, and I wish I kind of took that out, just more explosive in response to redirection. We label it as anger, but they might not be angry. They might be feeling something that we haven't labeled appropriately yet. They often tend to engage in really dangerous behaviors. So in the classroom setting, I see these kids that, you know, if they're not interested in an activity that we have, you might find them 2 seconds later climbing on the shelves, and then, you know, you go to try to help them get off of the shelf and they think, oh, that's fun. Now I'm going to go try to climb on the higher shelf, and then I'm going to knock the shelf down. And it just, this whole idea of, I just love this intensity of this movement, and there's a behavioral component of, I love this attention that I'm getting, and it just gets all mixed up together as like sensory behavior and just high energy need. So it, like, I'm kind of in that mode right now. It just becomes really, really intense, and it's very demanding of your attention. And it's really, really hard to help get these kids to calm down. They're constantly on the move. So this is really important for us to think about, that, you know, they're getting in this high. So we think, wow, this is a sensory problem. We've got to help give them some sensory things to bring them back down. And what I'm trying to pose to all of us today is that we think a little bit differently about that, and can we put our brains together and come up with some ideas that we can all share and try over the next few months and just see what happens. Okay, next slide, please. All right, some other things that everything didn't fit on one slide. Sorry about that. These are also kids that like to roughhouse. They like to touch everything, including the people in their space. They don't necessarily like to be touched. Which has, as an occupational therapist, I have to say, has been difficult for me. I work through touch. You know, I work with kids and I help them calm, oftentimes with some tactile input, with some calming rubs of their arms, or, you know, rub on their back. And I'm finding that a lot of these kids just can't adapt to that level of touch. And it's more than a sensory issue at this point in time. And that's when I tap into my psychology friends and my social work friends to say, hey, let's think through what can we find to help this child calm down, because the things that I know to do aren't necessarily helping. And so here's where I point out again that it's just that sensory seeking is really a misleading term. when it comes to these kids. There is a subgroup of kids that you can say, wow, he's spinning, so that's telling me that he needs to do something to regulate himself. I pose the question, if that spinning was giving him something, wouldn't you see that he eventually self-corrects and calms down? And he doesn't necessarily self-correct and calm down. So that it's not the input that they're looking for and that they're getting isn't helping them necessarily. So I'm going to go through two more slides just to show you one might resonate with you more than another. But this is just to reiterate again that this is the arousal threshold diagram. This is what we refer to as, what we look back to when we're thinking about helping kids with regulation. So the sensory over-responsive kids, their threshold is low. We need to raise their threshold. And then we do that with low energy activities. Sensory under-responsive, their threshold is really, really high. So we need to lower their threshold. And the sensory craver just doesn't fit into this model. They, you can't, flip to the next slide. This one might make more sense. So the under-responsive kid, we need to fill their cup. The over-responsive kid, we need to empty their cup. The sensory craver has a hole in his cup. So whatever input we give him, it just falls right back out. And then I wish I would have been able to draw an arrow that made a circle. So they crave the input, we give them the input, it just falls out. So it's really just this loop of, I crave it, I get it, I love it, I need more of it, but it just keeps me in this loop of, I need this high energy thing, and it doesn't necessarily organize them. Okay, so this is where, and I think I'm on time, this is where, oh, I am right on time, that we're gonna break out into groups, and I have a couple of questions that I want you all to think about. One is, are you really seeing the same thing that I'm seeing? We all have our places of work and we all have our people that we can talk to. And I really want to hear from everybody. Are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing? Are you struggling with this same thing in your head when it comes to sensory processing? If you are, what are some of the differences that you are seeing? And can you come back with just one example of a child that differs in this area? And then later, we're going to have a longer period of time to talk through what we might be able to do to problem solve activities for that child. I hope so much that people in your group had some like aha moments, and wow, this, for me, this has just been a validating experience. Even as the person that sees the kids, it's been nice to hear that other people are thinking and feeling the same things, and I hope that you experience the same in your subgroups. Okay, so more about this idea of sensory craving. What I'm going to do next is just go through some treatment principles that I have come up with, that I've learned that don't always work, but sometimes work, and I keep working on it, and hopefully this list will continue to grow. And then we're going to, I'm going to show you a couple of videos, and then we will put you guys to the test again in your groups to think about a patient or a child that you guys talked about in your previous session, and try to think about some activities that that you've tried that have worked and tried that haven't worked, and hopefully we can come up with a good list that we can all share together, and we'll record that at the end. And thank you. I see in the chat a couple of folks said that yes, they did see that in their groups. That's helpful to hear. So sensory modulation disorder, the treatment principles that I have learned is that we need to give the sensory craver more, or giving the sensory craver more input makes them want more of that input. And so I give my example all the time of, I used to be the worst chewer on pens, and it's a disgusting habit, and I would chew on any pen that anybody ever gave me. And the more that I chewed on pens, the more that I wanted to chew on pens. And I'm the same way with gum. The more I chew gum, the more I want to chew gum. I'm the one that makes the popping noises with it, and it just keeps getting more and more annoying. I have to get rid of that. It wasn't doing anything for me. It wasn't helping me organize. It was actually dysregulating and putting me in a little bit more of a dysregulated state. But the more I did it, the more I wanted it. So that's another example of that, that cup with a hole in it. The more I did it, the more I wanted it. These kids are not under aroused. They don't need more of that input. I can't figure out any more ways to say it. But we do have to provide a lot of structure to our movement-based activities, and we want to make them purposeful and functional. So we want to add actual difficult physical tasks for these kids. When I think about movement and its impact on regulation, I think about an example of a gentleman a long time ago. He would say, I wake up every morning and I run 5 miles. That's my heavy work. And I thought about it too. And I was like, and he said his heavy work after a while, that wasn't heavy work to him. He got used to it. He did 5 miles every single morning. So that was just part of his routine. And he found that he needed to do longer and longer and longer runs to be able to regulate himself. So for us, heavy work would be different than it would be for another person. So running 5 miles for me right now would be tremendous heavy work because it's not something that's part of my repertoire. So when we're thinking about any of the sensory-based activities, I always want to add movement, and I want from my therapists to hear where is the muscle activation? Like, what are we doing to help really bring in muscle activation for our heavy work activities? So a kid who is used to, say, pushing another kid on the playground in one of those like little carts, pushing isn't going to be a heavy work activity for him. It's something he's already acclimated to. It's something he's already used to. So we really have to break down what are the components that are difficult for the kids when it comes to movement, and how do we get those into our activities. And I have an example for you in just a moment. The other big area that I work on with the kids is to try to help them notice the awareness of their differences, the differences within them when they feel calm and alert, and then when they feel dysregulated. Can they tell the difference? Can they check in some way ahead of time and say, I'm feeling, I have pictures of a little like drawing that's a monster that's got like stars and, squiggles all around him, and he's dysregulated. And then I have another one that's blue and calm, eyes are attentive, now I feel this way. So just trying to find the ways to show them this movement activity helped you feel this way. So the other treatment principle that I think about is when we're doing heavy work activities that we have to interrupt them. So a lot of our heavy work tends to be fast-paced movement things that we want to interrupt them and return the kid to focus. So I'm going to get real OT on you right now, but when we move and we rely on extension and we go up and out, that is alerting. That's very, very alerting. In and down is really calming. So extension, we found in our kids, is really easy. Extension is really, really easy, and it's really strong. And you might see them when they start to melt and they start to have a hard time. Their tantrum is on the floor with a whole lot of, head back, arms back. But we need to help them figure out how to come in and down. How do we get that focus in and down? So when I left off a part of my slide here when I said help move, I want to make sure that this was my reminder to say help move toward individualized heavy work activities that really focus on the skill or muscle deficit for that child. Okay, so next slide, please. Some other treatment principles is just incorporating resistance to movement. So it's not just free movement. So an example of that would be, I have TheraBand, and say I have a kid who's just a fast runner and jumps all over the place. I might put the TheraBand around his hips, and he's got to walk from me and then reach forward. I have the treatment wall in my room has carpet on it, so I can put Velcro pictures up on that. So he's got to walk from me and then reach and get one of those pieces of our puzzle and bring it back down and match it. It's a file folder activity, match it as a file folder activity. So that's what I mean about adding resistance to it. push-pull activities. So I will actually do push and pull activities with the child, so they can press against me so I can feel their pressure, and then they've got to learn to do the press against, resistance against my hands. We'll do it with shoulders, we'll do it with feet, we can do it with hips. There's lots of fun ways that you can do push-pull activities. Body compression and pressure. Someone in my group had mentioned doing like the squeezes with the bean bags or those big cloud pillows that we have. And then within classroom settings or homes, anytime that you can, try to assign a job that you know is going to create some type of heavy work for that kid. I always have to talk about recess with kids. It's really easy to say you didn't earn recess today because the kids have been bouncing off the walls. But also, so I don't like to take recess away. I feel like that's, our kids need outdoor time just like the rest of us. But the other part is I really don't want you to think that just because they got the time to run outside that it's going to necessarily organize them when they come back inside. The things that are organizing are more really setting the limits and creating the boundaries for these kids, and then providing those small opportunities for success so they can feel it. They feel what it feels like to be in that right space at that right time, and they can learn to recognize it. I feel like our kids spend so much time in the up and out and bouncing all over the place that they don't recognize or get a lot of attention for when they really are down and focused. Probably because there's another kid that's bouncing off the walls that we've got to go help and pay attention to at that time. Okay, so I think I might have one more slide to go over before I show you a couple videos. So I think I have said almost all of these things. So I'm just going to go over that very last one, and that is that the kids are often redirected because of their unsafe behaviors, and they're, just getting constant reminders that they're, doing the thing that we don't want them to do. And so I just want to try to change that loop and really find that time that we can say, wow, you did that. Can you feel that? Can you feel how your body feels when you were sitting down and doing the Play-Doh activity with Miss Michelle? Okay. So if anybody from any of the groups would like to start throwing out some of the ideas, Elsie is going to help us catch some of these thoughts. Anybody from my group want to go?
I'm happy to talk. I know that we talked a lot about how this information is super helpful when we're choosing the calm down area or the safe place for children. To make sure that it is encouraging that calming position. So thinking about things like a bean bag or a love sack or other things that really help children get down in that calming position would be really great to have in whatever you call it, safe place, calm down area. I know everybody has their own names for it. And then also, we talked about at the very end, which we would have kept talking, I'm sure, if we had more time, but the idea of letting a tantrum go and they'll work through their tantrum, and how Kathy is teaching us that if we do, tantrums are very arousing, especially if the child is on their back extending, and so how we can help during a tantrum, helping children regulate and come to a more calmer place.
And one thing we talked about there, and we talked about this at one of our other sessions too, was we need more conversations about it, but how do we physically help the kids when they're in a tantrum? They don't respond well to, you have your, let them have their tantrum, they're gonna work it out. Because they're not gonna work it out. They're gonna keep going and becoming more dangerous and becoming more dangerous. So what are some positioning things that we can do to help the kids? So we did talk about having a weighted lap pad that the kids can use, and then we can personalize those lap pads because, especially with COVID now with all the cloth, but a personalized lap pad that either has stickers on it that have preferred toys or preferred characters. So you have that, and then you can look in and you can bring their attention in and down by saying, oh, I found PJ Masks, or I found Owlette. Who did you find? You know, they might not respond to you, but you're still trying to get their attention in and down.
Kathy, Michelle, that amazing foster mom that we all know, had a wonderful in-home for down and in, helping unload the dishwasher as a chore that is a down and in movement. And then also, though, then there's a sense of accomplishment and the opportunity to encourage a child as being a helper. And then Troy talked a lot about this idea of integrating activities for the child into the routines of the day, so the child doesn't stand out as needing to go do your OT thing, but rather it happens in that course, and the child is asked what they need and how they feel, how's their engine running, so to speak, and then comes up with a solution themselves. And he had a child say, I need to squeeze Play-Doh 32 times. And so that's what he would do. And that's what calmed him. And Troy, in his wisdom, had not thought of that one. So.
I just want to say, I told this to my group, but I think it might be worth mentioning to the entire group. In the first video where you had the little boy and he was just like going out, and then he immediately needed to come and grab you. That's an equally intensive but also calming movement, and I see that in my kiddos a lot. And so what our group talked about was this idea of having a high intensity but calming strategy, and how just meaningful that is for these kiddos to help them calm down. And one of our group members shared, you know, with a kiddo who's really dysregulated, kind of coming and putting both your hands on and using pressure to kind of help them calm back down.
And you know, I whenever I do put my hands on the kids, I always say, because I work in a preschool setting, you know, I always say my hands are here to help. You know, because I do get a lot of get your hands off me.
You muted yourself, Kathy. I don't know if you intended to, but speaking of hands-on, that push-pull has been something that I found personally very useful from infants on up through preschool. That gives, you know, kind of that deep pressure, and also is kind of fun, and it gets the movement. And I've had a lot of children respond very positively to that.
Kathy shared in our group too about the trampoline and how that can be escalating. I thought that was pretty neat. She suggested putting pictures or things on the floor, so you're bringing the kids back down. That was pretty interesting, I thought, as well.
Really great strategies. Looking at time, Kathy, and thinking we probably should wrap up in about the next minute or two, so we've got time for our case. I think everyone could keep going. This goes back to what John was saying. We could just keep talking about the strategy. And I think based on what Amber has said, her case will allow us to keep talking about this a little bit more as well.
Well, I just want to say thank you all. I really, you know, this is a topic that is new and different and hard for us to wrap our brains around, but I think if we have more people thinking in this kind of way, then we'll come up with more strategies and more things. So just thank you for helping me think about it. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Kathy. I think, as you said, you know, this is a topic where there's not a lot of research for you to dig from to do this, but we still need to be working with these kids. And so I love that you provided a framework for all of us. I know that's in my group, all these aha moments around just thinking from this framework and then trying to move in a systematic way to move us forward. So thank you so much for making this really challenging topic, something that I think we all feel like we have some common language around for sure. All right, Elsie, I'll make sure we give you time to share. And then does anybody have any, we have about 2 or 3 minutes. If anyone has any specific questions for Kathy, you can unmute yourself and ask, and or even after we start with the case, if you want to type any questions in the chat, you most definitely can do that as well. But I do want to make sure if anyone has any burning questions that they really wanted to unmute and ask Kathy about, I give you guys the time to do that. Okay. If not, I will encourage if anyone starts to come up with a question that you have up. I see in here, Melissa says, thank you, Kathy. I have a 5-year-old kindergarten student with autism who has a hole in his cup. We'll be putting some of these strategies to work on Monday.
Good.
So thanks. I love listening to you talk about this stuff. It's very reinforcing and learning new twists, for sure. And thank you again, Kathy, for a fabulous didactic presentation and discussion. I know everyone really enjoyed it. And Amber, what a great case for us to talk about today as well. So I hope you all have a lovely weekend. Enjoy Halloween. If you celebrate, have some candy, and we will see you back in 2 weeks.
Thank you.